Good morning. More than delighted to receive you. And I thank Lena for this, Doctor, for this privilege. I have a special spot in my heart for the generation of the future. As I always say, you represent 25% of the population in schools, but you represent 100% of the future. The 25% that you are studying and in schools are our future. So I spend a lot of time, and I'm very pleased to spend this time with you. And I want you to read this book, which has been just published by me, on the future as I see it, and as you see it, of course. You come from a great university, you have great education. Although I want to start by criticizing your university, as I did criticize Harvard and MIT and Columbia. I had the honor of speaking in September 15th, addressing MIT, and September 16th, I addressed Harvard, and in October, I spoke at Columbia. And I'm planning now in April, I think my media director just came in, international media. I will be at Stanford, what date? April 4?
April, sir.
April 4?
Yeah.
April 4, I will be addressing the University of Columbia and subsequently a couple of other leading universities. My theme is the failure of the educational system. And I just published an article yesterday in Jordan Times. Maybe you could have somebody, Khaled, make a copy of my article yesterday at Jordan Times on the failure of the educational system. I am calling that universities should learn from the failure of universities as a result of what you know as dropouts. You all know the dropouts who are now the leaders of the knowledge world. Leaders of the knowledge world are university dropouts. Of course, they have not failed. Universities have failed. The educational system under which I studied was fine at that time to graduate workers for the market. We went to school and to universities so that we can find jobs. And the great theme was to prepare students for the workplace. This is the objective of universities. Not anymore. The objective should be to produce innovators, creators. So instead of job seekers, we want universities to produce innovators who can who can produce startups and employ others rather than they themselves seek jobs. And with the level of unemployment today, which is almost 2 billion individuals in the world, and one cause of that unemployment is the failure of the educational system. In a speech I gave 2 months ago at an Arab regional education conference, I said I'm exploring possibilities for suing the world educational order for destroying the future of our children. So I wanted to start with this position. My position is I don't want you to be job seekers. I want you to be innovators. And that's why we started here in Amman this month, October, the first college of its own, I think, in the world, where students are not examined in order to graduate. They graduate by an invention. And if you don't invent, you don't graduate. So your graduation exam is the invention. That is what the world needs, innovators and not job seekers. Having said this, this is my educational mission, and I'm fighting for it all over the world. I think that I would stop at that this issue. I just have another point, and then I'll leave it for you to cross-examine me. My second point is I'm a firm believer that the world is going into a very serious economic crisis in the year 2020 that is after tomorrow. If you think of 2020, you're talking about next day. It's not far from what we are. In fact, it is starting, as you can see. Never in the recent history of humanity has been so much unsocial and economic rest at the same time in so many countries of the world. We always had a problem with Greece or a problem with Palestine, economic and social, with Mexico, any other country. But today, there isn't a single country that is not facing serious economic and social problems. I expect and predict in 2020 that we will run into an economic crisis, and which will culminate in what we call stagflation, stagnation and inflation at the same time. I also predict that the only way out of that crisis is to go into a third world war. So you are the generation of the Third World War. I was the generation of the Second World War. You will witness the Third World War, and I can leave it to your imagination to think who are the two parties fighting this war. It certainly is not the US versus Iran, as press sometimes wants to present it. That is not a world war. That is, I have my views on that, but that's not my subject. But this war can be a good thing. Wars are not always bad. You remember that the Second World War resulted in so many renaissances and so many prosperities in prosperous economies in the rest of the world. There are well-known warlords. There are countries that take advantage of wars. So it's a mix, as Franklin Roosevelt used to say. Whenever he consulted with an economist, the economist would say on one hand and on the other. So he used to say, can anybody find me a single-handed economist? Every time I talk to economists, it's always on one hand and on the other hand. There is no one-handed economist. There are always two sides to any economic decision. So we have to prepare ourselves as an organization. For a year now, we are preparing ourselves to ride over this expected crisis and to take advantage of it rather than to suffer its consequences. And I think it would be interesting for you if you would take the time to do some research and study and write to me about what you think of what I'm saying in regards to what I'm saying in this regard. Perhaps I'm a fool, but as Winston Churchill once said, the greatest lesson in life is to realize that idiots are sometimes right. So do some research and let me know what you think before the crisis comes, as soon as possible in 2019, because the process will start to take its momentum in 2019 and will hit the world in 2020. I'm now writing a major thesis on this subject, and I will be addressing a community of ambassadors this evening. Today, I will be addressing them on this subject of the prospective crisis and imminent world war. So that's a subject I think it's my duty to create awareness about, so that we don't just sit and wait and see what comes. So please do some research, do some thinking, and if you are kind enough, write to me at my direct private mail, tag@taggy.com. TAG, this is my personal email, TAG, T for Talal, A for Abu-Ghazaleh, G, A for Abu, G for Abu-Ghazaleh, TAG, dot, tag, I, tag international, tag@taggy international, tag@taggy, tag@taggy.com. We have our own internet, we are our own ISP. We don't use a service provider, and we are our own domain name registrar. We are one of the 7 globally accredited domain name registrars. So tag TAG@taggy, TAGI.com. Write to me. I want to know what the future generation thinks of what I'm saying. I'll stop here and thank you again, and the word is yours.
Thank you. Just to say thank you, and then I'll give it to Dr. Sheila.
Yes. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Talal Abu-Ghazaleh. My knowledge of Dr. Talal Abu-Ghazaleh go for like decades, but I actually met him in person this year during my Fulbright project here in Jordan. And the way I wanted to connect with him is to get his opinion on what can we do as scholars. And I had a student, and actually 2 students later on, from the United States on what can we do for post-conflict reconstruction in the Middle East, and specifically on human development. And he was kind enough to welcome us and to talk to us about many issues that need to be handled, specifically the human development factor. Because, you know, as you all know, I expect that that wars kill humanity. And we need to reconstruct the human being so we can create and help innovators. And I do agree actually with Dr. Abu-Ghazaleh that wars, as much as they create destruction, they are an opportunity. The issue is how can we grab this opportunity and come up with a positive impact. And while during our meetings, as an advisor for the University of Chicago's Harris Council, I thought of you guys, I thought of how can we connect the university to the region here. And so as students and future generation, how can we help the region where we have a vested interest in, not only in being part of wars and conflicts, but also in part of reconstruction and for a positive future. And I saw many answers to my thoughts and vision with Dr. Abu-Ghazaleh, and I thought that we can connect, you guys can connect with him and can ask your questions, your concerns, and I'm sure he would be most welcome, you and your questions. And as you mentioned, please email him because he definitely will respond. He's so prompt in responding to emails and giving his opinion, and it's really valuable, invaluable opinion. It's just amazing how his life has been a major. I've read most of his books that he gifted me, and it was amazing, amazing life. Very resilient person who lived through many challenges. He didn't come from a rich family. His background is very humble, and I'm sure you will read more about him and you will know how an amazing person he is. And again, thank you very much for welcoming us here. And I hope that this will be a step to a better, for you to think more and for a more constructive thinking in terms of your majors even, and what to do in the future. And now I'm going to leave this to Sheila, who actually was the main person behind organizing this whole trip and bringing you up here. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much for having us here. We're really delighted to meet with you. So this group of students, they are all master's students in public policy. And the purpose of programs such as this is for our students to really understand not just the world, but they're focusing on conflict right now, and to understand conflict from the perspective of people on the ground. And based on what you were saying previously about students being innovators, before you, you have 18 students of public policy. So I would really love to ask you, what is your advice for them to become, they all want to go out and be active in the policy world. What is your advice for how they can be innovators in the policy world?
This is a great question, and it's a great opportunity and a great pleasure to address students from a great university. I would like very much to express an opinion on the subject, and I've never been asked this question, so it's a pleasure for me to say the following. The policy we see, and I don't want to blame anything. I'm not a politician, and I don't talk politics. I believe that there is no such a thing as politics. I think the world is run on economics. And there isn't a political decision that is not either predicted for an economic result or caused by an economic fact. So I can't think, and if anybody can tell me any political decision which is not economically reasoned or based, I would be very interested. So I'm talking pure economics. I'm not here to criticize nor praise the word order, political order, whether it's led by the great USA or by the G20 or by whatever, or UN. I'm not talking about the political order. I want to talk about the economic order. And I think your focus and your innovation should be on public policy for a better economic order. The focus in public policy has always been political order. And for that purpose, again, unfortunately, the leaders of the world somehow wrongly thought that the best way to rule this world is by the old British wisdom, divide to rule, which was translated to American language because the Americans, as in one of the famous plays, the Americans have never spoken English for many years. You know that tradition, old song. The divide to rule in English became in American create chaos. The policy of chaos creation in the world was considered by the world political order as a means of controlling and ruling the world. Obviously, it worked. I am not at all denying that there was great success. But every tool that we use comes to an end. And as again, I'm a scholar of Shakespeare. I wanted to become a Shakespearean writer, but because my family needed my support, I went into a job that can generate more income than becoming a Shakespeare scholar. And I taught Shakespeare in schools when I was at the university at your age or younger. In fact, younger. It was in my undergraduate years that I was teaching Shakespeare. Shakespeare said once, "We often create tools that are used against us." We oft, in Old English, we oft create tools that are used against us. This world, what Condoleezza Rice called creative chaos, worked as a tool of policy. But it reached a point now it's becoming used against us. The chaos that we have created, all of us, this is not, again, I keep repeating that I'm not a politician and I'm not criticizing any particular country or leadership. I'm talking purely economics. And more than economics, I'm talking social interest. I have been recently elected by the United Nations to what is called a high-level advisory board on social impact. I'm glad that the UN is now looking at social impact and not on economic impact only. The world has developed wonderful economic indicators which can lead us to see the rate of growth, rate of unemployment, rate of inflation, etc. But there has never been focus on what is the actual impact on the individual. You can see countries with a good GDP growth while the human and social situation is deteriorating. So I am, for my person, among the group of eminent members of this high-level advisory board, I'm innovating, since we're talking about innovation, I'm innovating social indicators to reflect the impact of any decision, whether it is, you call it political, military, or economic. So the world needs social indicators to measure the impact on the individual, because in fact, the final analysis, it's the human being who matters. So I think what I would want you to do is to work on how you can redirect the public policy of the world, the global or the international global policy, from objectives which are short-term, and this is a major criticism of most of the countries of the world, including the US. What the malice that we see in Europe today, in France and in other countries and in our own countries, is politicians always, when they run for election and for positions, they promise their citizens things which the country cannot afford. So it becomes a problem how to meet these targets, and a problem, if you meet them, how to be able to provide for them. So what we need is in public policy how to make it social-centered, citizen-centered, rather than government policy-centered. We always think of government policy. How can I be a powerful country? How can I get the maximum advantages? How can I benefit as a state, as a country versus other countries, or as a group of countries, or as a person, or as a leader, in fact, in many cases. but as I've never seen a focus in public policy on public policy for a better life for human beings. On one occasion, I was on a panel, and I was very honored to be on a panel sitting next to Bill Gates. And one of the questions we were debating was, what is the future? How do we define this decade, this century? And in his brilliant way, he said, this century, I can describe it in 2 words, the rest of this century. And that is about 25 years ago. I'm talking, this panel was 3 decades ago. He said artificial intelligence. The rest of this century will be governed by artificial intelligence. How true was Bill Gates? And then the next question was, when will be able to think of humanity in our innovation and creation and use of our various technological talents and inventions? Because for the time being, the top companies are top companies because they want to be the richest, the best, the most profitable, obviously, including my own organization. We take pride that we are the global leader. We are the greatest leader in the world, including the US, in the providing of professional protection services for intellectual property rights. We are the global leader in intellectual property. What's our objective? To protect intellectual property and to become the most important and the most powerful intellectual property company in the world. Is it in our focus? How does that help the human being? No. I'm also criticizing myself. I'm saying that this is the situation with all the major companies. Apple is competing with Huawei for who is going to be richer, more profitable, and more powerful. All the invention we have in the US today, I think about 70,000 artificial intelligence scientists who are working full-time on artificial intelligence innovation. We have about half that number in China. In other fields, in all sorts of innovation fields, we have experts all over the world. But all our technology development is directed and is centered on the concept that in order, I have designed, and I'm glad since you're from Chicago, my name is in the Hall of Honor of Chicago as one of the greatest promoters or contributors to intellectual property. I was honored by the international organization, international community in intellectual property for that purpose. But when we talk about intellectual property, we say we have to protect it so that the inventor can have the benefit of his time and intelligence and investment. That's great. But there is nothing in the public policy disciplines or order in the world that says this should be directed for the benefit of the individual. So when we were debating this with Bill Gates, his idea was, or his prediction was, after we are through with the knowledge age and artificial intelligence, under the artificial intelligence revolution of this century, perhaps in the next century, we will be going into what he called the wisdom age, where we will be innovating, creating policies, managing crisis, etc., for the benefit of humanity. I understand that people like Bill Gates and all the wealthy and prosperous organizations contribute to society like we do. We earmark every year 50% of our profits for social service. We invest, we have our own plans. We don't donate money. We run programs for capacity building, and we provide for that. We have something like 40 programs ongoing all the time. It's not a donation or a project. Institutions that cater for social development, particularly in education. That is fine, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when are we going to invent for the benefit of humanity and not for the benefit of becoming wealthy and rich so that I can donate. The situation today is be great, be profitable, be the best. And when you're that, you are able to donate. That's good. That's so far. But when are we going to direct all our policies, including creativity, including public policy, including innovation in public policy, towards the objective of what is good for humanity and not what is good for me as a company or for me as a person, so that I can be kind and do my corporate social responsibility. So I think what we need is to start an awareness process or create a new thinking trend on wisdom in public policy. If I want to summarize it, put it under one heading, one title, I would say we need to develop wisdom in our public policy, and not what is the best public policy for me, what is the wisest public. And wisest is not necessarily what is the best. It is not necessarily what is good for me. What is wisest is completely different. And hopefully we will then be able to go into the wisdom age, which I hope will be before the end of this century, because humanity is at great trouble everywhere. And things are not getting better, they're getting worse. If you look around you, rarely you can see any symptoms of positive directions. Indicators are all in the wrong direction. So that, I think, if I want to summarize, I think we need to create and innovate in the field of public policy towards the wisdom public policy.
Can I comment on this?
Thank you. Actually, this is definitely what the world needs in terms of wisdom, and still the shift, this paradigm shift that you're talking about in terms of moving from what has been ongoing in terms of neoliberalism and liberalism has created this gap between the people and the businesses and the government. So what you are trying to tell us here, to reconstruct this human being and to help build an innovative and creative human being for his own business or her own business, is by relaying this wisdom. Is this wisdom going to be taught at schools, universities, or vocational training, or how would this paradigm shift happen?
You're touching on a very sensitive issue which bothers me. If I say that in the US there is at least 70,000 AI scientists, and I'm talking about only those who are fully dedicated, because there are research centers using artificial intelligence much more than that number. Unfortunately, there are countries in the world that do not know what artificial intelligence means. And they are debating whether they should accept the idea of artificial intelligence as a concept. What I'm scared of is because I know that artificial intelligence is not only to make this more intelligent, so that Fadi doesn't need to move it toward me when I am talking. It moves itself, and it can get closer to me when I turn my head, because it will be more intelligent. And this applies to everything. The most important and serious part of artificial intelligence is how it's going to change human beings.
Yeah.
We will have, through artificial intelligence, and I'm only mentioning a few highlights of what impact artificial intelligence will have on human beings. One, it will make us more capable of, with a memory equivalent to a computer. Like we are going to make the computer smart to be able to think like we think, our brains will become as competent as a computer in its capacity of retaining data, analyzing it, and mining it. Now, that is, in other words, there will be a human being who will have a better brain than another human being. It will help us have a more memory span. It will help us preempt diseases. Instead of treating diseases, I happen to serve on the advisory board of the World Intellectual Property Organization of the United Nations, WIPO. And next to me was the chairman of Glasgow Wellcome, which is one of the major companies in pharmaceuticals. And he said, in 20 years' time, there will be no ready medicine over the shelf for everybody. It will be tailored to every individual according to his genes. That's why, for me, for example, I like Panadol. Fadi prefers aspirin. It's because his genes are different. So, what we are saying is, this revolution will, instead of, and he said that the medicines we provide, at least 70% of them do not treat it, are sedatives. Instead of that, we are going to go into process when the child is born, by doing his genetic map, we can find out what diseases he is going to catch. Is he going to be diabetic? And through sequencing the genes, we can stop him from being diabetic instead of treating him for diabetes. So what am I talking about? We're talking about moving from what was called the gap, and I chaired, in my capacity at the UN as the chairman of the Global Alliance for ICT for Development, I was leading the two summits, World Knowledge Summit, WSIS they call them, World Society on Information, in Geneva and in Tunisia. And we were talking about the economic gap between countries. We're talking about something, we are looking at something much more serious than the economic gaps between countries, rich countries and poor countries. This was the subject in the WSIS process. Now I'm concerned that we will have a human gap, an individual in a country who doesn't have the access and the resources to artificial intelligence, who is inferior to that who has the privilege of being in an artificial intelligence community. This is very serious. And those who are in that community should not feel very happy that they are in that community. Believe me, coming back to the wisdom age, it is unfortunate for those who are lucky to be living in a world where there are those who are unlucky. And this is something politicians do not understand. They don't understand that there is a greater wisdom than just getting the best for me. America first, me first. It doesn't work. And we have seen that it's not working. It never worked. We said it in Jordan, Jordan first. Where is Jordan? It doesn't work. It's not, this is not what any protectionism and instead of thinking of the humanity as one community, and as in my speech, one of my recent speeches, I said we need to move from country communities to a human community. And this takes a lot of creation of public awareness, that it is in the interest of Jordan to realize that, and I'm using my own country because I love it and I'm proud of it, it is our duty to see that the community around us in the region and in the world is as conducive to my interest as my own community. We have to start thinking of the global community interest rather than the country community. Countries who have concentrated on this and created around them areas of trouble and poverty and hatred and unrest are not fortunate. This has to be a concept. And this applies to the community within the country, within the regions in the country. So what I'm talking about is we need to think and focus on humanity as one community. And this is a wisdom that we have not reached yet. I have not reached it. I'm trying only to analyze it and explain it. I'm not claiming that I'm at that level. I'm not. But I'm trying to study and see how and where to start and how to go in that process. How can we, together, create a better world for every human being? That's the only solution. You know, if you go even to books of religion or to the wisdom of the greatest wise men of history, they talk about humanity. They never talked about a particular group or religion or sect. We have to go back to the original concepts of wisdom. The pillars of wisdom are for human beings and not for a particular group or a particular country. Saying that our global partners, our strategic partner, everybody is your strategic partner. Because if he is not, he is your enemy. If he is your enemy, he can do as much damage as your enemy rather than being your friend. So this concept of moving, and maybe it's because I'm too old. I've completed my 80 years of life, and I enjoyed my life career as a career. I enjoyed what I did. I'm very proud of what I achieved, but I have come to reflect now. Did I really do what I wanted to do when I started as a little schoolboy to walk 4 hours every day to school because I couldn't afford any kind of transport? And I decided to become, at that time, something that I didn't know, but to become. Did I achieve what I should have achieved? I'm not sure, because I believe that the community and the overall culture, the human culture, is very much lacking. We always hear politicians talking about what they are going to do for the country, what they're going to do for their people. We don't hear political leaders talking about what they are going to do for humanity. Then they forget that if your neighbors in this humanity are not addressed like you are, you can be very uncomfortable. We need this shift in what public policy is about. Again, I really believe that, and that's why I'm very proud, as I said, I'm on this high-level advisory board at the UN on social impact. And when we talk social impact, we don't talk about local social impact. We're talking about human social impact for everybody. The only way any group of people or country or individual can be happy is everybody around, if everybody around you is happy. That's what I came to know, and I came to realize that happiness is more important than wealth, more important than success, more important than power. And I learned that to be loved is more important than to be powerful or to be feared. That is not public policy. We now, in public policy, we want the world to know how powerful they are so that we can create fear in the enemy or in the other party that I am very powerful. Create love. Love is much more powerful than power itself. It's the greatest power. And that's what I have learned, and what I enjoy today is the love I have from everybody that knows me. I go around and I see people saluting me and loving me. I have no power. I'm not powerful at all. I'm just an ordinary citizen. But I managed to create, in my limited person and modest person, I was able to create a trend or a theme of love. And it goes in, I'm sure, many of, sometimes, unfortunately, because it's mostly in Arabic, my statements and my trendy videos on the power of love go. One of them, I'm told, was half a billion, had a half a billion circulation about how powerful is love instead of power and hatred.
What you're talking about, and I would like the students to, since they are here, we're trying to open the doors for them to understand more the region, the Middle East, and to, what you have just said is missing a lot in this part of the world, in terms of, first of all, what's happening, actually we see the gap. But what we need to see, how can we reconstruct, there has been ongoing destruction. Now we have the opportunity to rebuild, but how can we build it in such a wise way, the way you are talking, so we would have more, innovation, more artificial intelligence in this part of the region. So maybe the students would have some questions before, and we can initiate such a discussion, unless and when you ask a question, just your first name and then ask the question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Gonzalo Pons. I was thinking about what you said about the humanity community, or like a global community. I was very curious. So I often try to think of how the responsibility that countries around the world, especially powerful countries, have to react to crises in other countries. Because when we think about international development or aid, not a lot of people complain, it's just trying to do good. But what happens when you have to intervene in a crisis, when for some people it's a crisis, for other people it's not a crisis in the same country? I guess I was thinking, for example, in the conflict that is happening right now in the Middle East, but also for example, something is closer to my home, that is Venezuela, oftentimes I try to think or question myself, who decides when is necessary to intervene? Who decides, or what is that threshold that demands international interference, or interference maybe not be the right word, or intervention? And who decides that? I guess that's my question. Is it each country? Should we do is it the UN?
Thank you. I want to salute you because you're from Venezuela, because at 2:30 today, I will be receiving the Venezuelan ambassador.
So just to clarify, I'm from Peru, not Venezuela.
Not Peru,
It's
but
a
I
major-
thought this is at Venezuela. Well, on the ambassador is coming to see me to say farewell, to bid me farewell because he's leaving. But let's use Peru or Venezuela or Palestine or Afghanistan or Yemen. Is it fair that the world watched what is happening in Yemen, thinking that this is an isolated country? Well, why should I care about what's going on in Yemen? The most recent disaster. And I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just talking about the situation. This is what I'm talking about. The difference between what is happening and what I'm asking for is to move from crisis creation to crisis prevention, and not crisis at the solution. You know, where Americans are great about crisis management, and this is something probably you studied in one of your courses, crisis management. I'm not talking about crisis management. I'm talking about crisis prevention. If the leaders of the world spend more time on crisis prevention than the time they spend on crisis creation and crisis management, we would have a better world. Unfortunately, it's not only a state of mind, it's a state of heart. Because we have to become better human beings than we are today, all of us. We think that what happens to somebody who is starving and is not even on the street finding leaves from trees to eat as none of my business. It takes a change of heart in this world. Most of the problems, and I dare to say that we live in, are human created. What happened in Iraq was human created. What happened in Afghanistan was human created. What happened in Palestine was human created. What happened in Venezuela is human. Peru, every country in the world that has problems is the creation of human beings. I challenge you to find a single case where the problem is not created either by self-infliction or by an external party. There is no disaster in the world that is not, I'm not talking about natural disasters, of course. There is no human disaster in this in this world that has not been created, either by our own selves or by somebody against us. This is what I'm talking about. And this is a philosophy. It's an ideology that we have to develop. And if we want to do a study, how to move from crisis creation and crisis management to crisis prevention. What we have is all created by us in every country in the world. Every country in the world, every community in the world, the problems are created either by our own selves, the victims, or we were the victims of an outsider.
I had, and that'd be interesting in getting your perspective as a successful global business person is, what are your thoughts, and I'm trying to be succinct, what are your thoughts on impact investing or socially responsible investing? Socially responsible investing, where an investment portfolio will be comprised of companies that have been certified in some way as being socially responsible or not contributing to
Absolutely.
conflicts or creating weapons or tobacco. You know, there's all types of tiers of how people do it. Is that a practical way to possibly work towards perhaps a vision that you might have for the future?
I love your question, because this old man, one of the things he did in his life is I drafted the Global Compact of the United Nations document. The Global Compact was about corporate social fairness and responsibility, not just responsibility, about gender, about employment, and about corporate social responsibility. I co-chaired it with Kofi Annan and with Ban Ki-moon when Ban Ki-moon took over. And it's the only, and I insisted when Kofi Annan asked me to chair it, I said, I want to give, this is a human thing. This is not a political, nor economic, nor financial objective. This is human. And I want you to be its chair. And it's the only organization under the UN which is chaired by the SG Secretary General, by the SG, not as Secretary General, but as chairman. We were co-chairs. So I insisted that he should, for a change, and it's the only situation that I know of where the UN Secretary General is called chairman. He chaired this, and I was his co-chair. And the idea was, how can we write the 10 principles? We drafted 10 principles for a better world. I think this should be revisited, and I would encourage you to do it probably as a research. That I'm talking about 2 decades ago. Now, this document needs to be revisited and developed into a more appropriate document for today. Because I want to move from the concept, as I said, of corporate social responsibility. Because although it's a good concept, and I was trying as a result in that process to say that companies who contribute to society are not donating. They are repaying for a favor. And when I talk about corporate social responsibility, I say, if companies could realize and remember that whatever they earn and whatever money they have came from the community. So when they do any project for the community, they are only repaying. They're not giving any favor or are doing any donation. So corporate social responsibility should be seen as a repayment for a debt which we owe companies, which we owe to society. My income comes from the society. So I'm not doing favors to the society. I am repaying for what they have, what society has given me. Now, we need to move in that global compact from this concept of corporate social responsibility, plus the other 10 principles, where there's one principle on gender equality, one principle on employment of youth, of children, one principle on equality in the workplace, etc. What I think we need a new global compact that could be proposed, and maybe by you, to the United Nations, by Chicago University as a premier school of the world. So how can we develop this UN Global Compact to become a human global compact? Because when I do my corporate social responsibility, I mostly am directing it to my community. my concept is now we have to start thinking of the global community, not my own community. Saudi Arabia will never be comfortable with a country neighboring it called Yemen, which has economic and social and problems. So would any other country in the world. You know, the U.S., whatever you want to call it, if you think you're a prosperous country, you're lucky, you're happy, enjoy thinking that you are a prosperous country. But a prosperous country with a neighbor that has problems is problems for you. So we need to move from the global compact where corporate social responsibility, and the first time the word corporate social responsibility was a term which I coined in that document. We need to move now to human social responsibility, corporate human responsibility, and not only to the community that I live in. It's inevitable. If we want to live in a happy world, we have to be all happy. Look at it in a house. If one of the members of the family is uncomfortable, unhappy, miserable, it makes all your life miserable. This is the world we live in. It's a family that has to be taken care of by all. Everybody has to take care of everybody. So that my advice is we have now to move beyond the concept of corporate social responsibility to a corporate human responsibility.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Yolis, and I come from Mexico. And I got very inspired in what you say about education, because I think education is a transformation, especially the ones that you invest in early childhood education. And one of the things is that for the past almost 12 years, I have been working with children, very vulnerable children, who are involved in drug cartels. And yesterday I was talking to the doctor, we saw that even though we have different problems, you know, like you guys are facing problems regarding to refugees, we start to see the same problems that children are facing. But one of the things is that as a policymaker, I know that I am right now turning into a policymaker, but it's very hard to convince the policymakers that are right now on the position. So with all your experience, what do you recommend us, the future policymakers that are involved in education, how can we make a connection and consciousness with the ones that are right now in the public and also the government? Because if we talk about all of these policies and all of these implementations, we have to know that the next generation that is coming are these little and vulnerable children that we sometimes don't really care about them. So in your perspective, what advices can you give to the policy makers that are involved in education?
That's a very good question, and I would like you to answer your own question by writing a book for children, like this one, which is being taught in schools now. Now, this story of Talal Abu-Ghazaleh, the Minister of Education decided that it should be reading material for all schools. I'd like you to write a book for children on how, because this process has to start not only as a public awareness and the research at the level of scholars and governments and media, but also educational level. If you could write a book for children on how, on the concept, on the theory, that a happy country is a country that lives in a happy world. And that a happy individual is a happy individual when all the people around him are happy. United States of America would be a happier country if Mexico is happy. That has to be. It's not fair to be silent and to say, I want to protect America. Fine, I want to protect America, but America would be better protected if Mexico is happy than if Mexico is my enemy and I build a barrier between me and Mexico. We have to be courageous enough to speak out and say that living in a happy environment is cheaper and is better than fighting in an unhappy environment. I would like to write a book for children, teaching them this philosophy of what we're talking about, the world of wisdom, moving from the knowledge world to the knowledge of wisdom, because this is where they will be living, the knowledge of wisdom, and where happiness of humanity should be our target, and the love of humanity should be our target. And with that, and that is for my own good. It's not just because I want to be nice, and the concept so far is wonderful. USAID, and I'm a great friend of USAID, donates and generously supports. So are the many other funds in the world of the UN, etc. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about you being good to others by giving them. I'm talking about by being good in creating a community that is all happy and good. And not that I become very powerful and I'm able to donate. Instead of focusing on being more powerful, more wealthy, more able to give aid, how can I make you not need aid? That's why our focus in all our projects is how to make the individuals not need us. We don't give them, we don't give money, we don't give food, we don't give any kind of assistance. We try to make people undependent, to make them independent and undependent on us. I would like to see books written about this to educate the children, instead of the books that teach them about me first, my country first, being great, being wealthy, being powerful, being good. And these are also the principles of religion. We often forget in the mood that politicians put us all over the world. We forget the principles of religions, the real principles of religions. We forget the real principles of wisdom. So I think one of the things you can do is to try to write in language addressed to children, how loving everybody in the world can make you a happier person. Last question.
Then I'll give it to Gonzalo. Go ahead.
So it's just a follow-up to Yoli's question. So when we were in the summer, we were in a conference that refugees was one of the topics, and I remember someone saying that one of the biggest strategies of this refugee crisis was that there would be a generation that wouldn't have education, or that would have limited education. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. But reading a few pages in this book, which by the way I found completely inspiring, I'm dying to ask you, do you think, it sounds like education was a pretty important factor in your life and something you're really passionate about right now. Do you think that education in times of refugee, or like for refugee children, should be adapted in some way? So if there is some type of need that you think refugees have, or refugee children have, that should be addressed more than in regular education?
I have news for you. The highest internet literacy percentage in the world is in refugee camps and Palestinian refugees. Don't be under any misunderstanding. Do you know that Yemen now is one of the highest connectivity, IT use countries in the world? Because that is part of my other book. I don't know if you got it. Yes, Blessing of Suffering. The Syrian refugees in the Zaatari camp, whom we serve under a program with the European Union, my organization, Talal Abu-Ghazaleh, and the EU, have a program to teach Syrian refugees in the camp for master degrees, bachelor and master degrees, online from accredited universities in the world. The Syrian refugee, and the Palestinian refugee, and every poor person in the world, his lifeline is his gadget. He doesn't have a cinema to go to. He doesn't have a garden to take his girlfriend to. His life is entirely linked to this gadget which he uses to talk, to read, to reach out to family, to do anything. So the literacy in Palestine, for example, the literacy rate is one of the highest in the world, including the Western world. But it is up to 95% literacy. So, to answer your question, all these people need is connectivity and a gadget. And by the way, let me make an announcement which I'm doing for the first time. We are now manufacturing an educational tool. We call it Tag Educator. It's being produced in China, like your iPhone, like everything else. But it's designed by us, produced by us. This gadget is intended to be able to become affordable. Because as you know also, at least 50% of the cost of your whatever tool you are using is profit. At least. Add to it, and this is how a company can become the greatest, the largest wealth organization in the world. And there is another 20% for marketing costs. So if we produce this gadget not for profit, but for the sake of helping humanity, we can produce it at least half the cost with the same specs. Add to that, we are going to make it with Wi-Fi and internet connectivity, of course, and access to our cloud for all programs, educational, etc., online, which we provide. What I'm trying to say is, what we need is now to move in the knowledge age from the traditional concept that we want to give them schooling. They don't need it. They don't need schools. Nobody needs schools. Schools are out of date. If you know that there is a famous school in Britain called Harrow. Harrow doesn't have any classes anymore. Students live in a hostel and teach each other. Schools, in one of my speeches I said we should be ashamed of ourselves, because if you look at the classroom over the last 150 years, the change has been zero. The only change is from sitting on the ground, because we didn't have tables, is we sit on desks. Look at what happened in everything, in your watch, in your mobile, in your car, in your computer, all the technology development except in education. So forget it. They don't need schools, because the knowledge world, as I claim, is moving from teaching to learning. There is no teacher, my friend, who has anything to teach you which is not on the internet. There is no teacher. If he comes up with something new, it's an invention. He is not teaching. The material, the teacher, that's why we have these dropouts. The teacher cannot have more knowledge than the knowledge in the knowledge world. So we don't need teachers, we don't need schools. And I, again, one of my functions in my responsibilities at the UN as chairman of the Global Alliance for ICT and Development, I called for human right of access to the internet for everybody in the world. Oh, that's all they need. Give me access, give me connectivity, and give me a tool. And I will learn and I will be better than you in Chicago. Because I'll have more time to study than you do in your campuses and your beautiful gatherings in the evenings. Because I will be spending 24 hours studying. I will be better than you. And I'm one person who is against campuses, and I think they are a source of malice rather than any goodness. So what we need is a drive for human access and affordability of the knowledge tool. And we are working on that. Also in both cases. We, with the European Union also, Talal Abu-Ghazaleh organization, now have installed a dedicated internet line to the backbone directly in the US for research for all universities in the region. So no university can claim that we don't have research facilities and research connectivity. This is a dedicated internet line. It's already there now, and we are now in the process of connecting it to countries and to universities. The line is already in place. It cost us a few million to put it in place, but the idea is that this internet line will link the research community in the region to the research community in Europe and in the US and the rest of the world for research. That's what people need. Nobody needs to be taught. There is nothing you can teach me. I can find it. It's there. Everything a teacher is going to teach is already taught. So the focus should be on moving from teaching to learning and educational institutions becoming learning places and not teaching places. I'm sorry, I have to go to another commitment. I would have loved to spend the whole day with you.
Thank you very much for your time. We have a student would like to.
Oh, thank you.
Sir Talal Abu-Ghazaleh, on behalf of all my classmates, the University of Chicago, the Pearson Institute, we brought you this for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my child. Because I have, I don't say you are my children, not even my grandchildren, because I have 3 of my grandchildren who graduated, unfortunately not from Chicago, but from Yale. As Bill Clinton used to say, unfortunately I graduated from Yale, not from Harvard. But I thank you very much. I'd like to have a photo.
Yes, group photo. Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.